We'll get started talking about the secret sauce for unlocking effective collaboration, aka how assessment drives collaboration, giving away a little bit of the secret there. I think this is my third summit, and they've all been great chances to think through these things together. So without further ado, I'll introduce myself a little more fully. I'm Elliot Felix. I lead the higher ed advisory practice at a global engineering and consulting firm called Bureau Happold. And I'm also the author of The Connected College, which is an encouraging evidence-based playbook for breaking down silos so that students succeed. In my career doing strategic planning and operational planning and facilities planning, I've had the good fortune to work with more than 100 colleges and universities, helping them rethink what they offer, how they operate, how they're organized so that students succeed. And I've been able to share a lot of that thinking in the Connected College, which is really a playbook, a toolkit to help folks work better together to help students succeed. And it was one of the 10 best books in higher ed last year from Forbes. And I'm excited to share some of the insights from the book and from my work with you today. The way the book is organized informs a lot of what we're going to talk about today, because if you imagine the org chart of a college or university, there's a chapter for each function, right? There's an introduction about the trends and the big picture. There's a conclusion to wrap it all up. And in between, in that sort of sandwich, there's administration and assessment and academic programs and academic support, academic libraries, student affairs, athletics, facilities, advancement, board governance, breakthrough ideas like AI and change management. And with all this, the idea is really to help folks shift from conventional wisdom to a more connected future, where instead of stay in your lane, it's about busting silos, or instead of tradition as a strength, it's about agility. Instead of seeing markets and missions as conflict, it's about partnering with industry. Instead of saying demographics are your destiny, it's understanding that differentiation is. Instead of getting spread more and more thin, doing more with less, it's about focusing so you could do less with more. And when you do all those things, you create these 5 key connections, belonging to a community, so that you're connected to other folks, you're connecting students to support, you're connecting courses to career paths, you're collaborating internally, you're partnering externally. And so today's session is going to be quite interactive. It's going to give a chance really for us to think through the issue of collaboration and the role that assessment can play in it across a number of different dimensions, where I'll share some insights and some advice and my experience, and we'll have a chance to talk through things. And we'll go in these 3 chunks. We'll talk about what success looks like for collaboration. Then we'll discuss, then we'll talk about what the barriers might be to that successful collaboration. We'll discuss, and then we'll share some solutions to give you some practical ideas and advice and examples and evidence, and we'll discuss. So that'll be the flow for today. To start off, I want to hear from you all about what success looks like. So I would love to hear what makes a successful team. And you could type your answers in the chat. You could come off mute and let me know. But if you think about a team you've been on, it could be your little league team, or it could be the team you're on right now, and anything in between, what makes a successful team? Shared agency and purpose. Great. Trust, clear roles, ownership, and support. I love it. What else? Communication, transparency. I think those are great too. I think those are all great ingredients for a successful team. If we're thinking about what is the secret sauce for collaboration and the role that assessment might play in that, these are definitely key ingredients. And hopefully this sauce becomes not so secret and we start to share it and use it. So if we know what a successful team is, it's one with trust and communication and transparency and shared purpose and all the great things you said. I want you to imagine a team, and you don't have to close your eyes to do this, but imagine a team that doesn't know how to win the game they're playing. They don't know the rules of the game. They don't know who's playing what position. They don't practice together. They don't watch the game film. That's not a recipe for success. That's not getting us anywhere near our secret sauce for collaboration. And pardon all the food metaphors if it's making you hungry. A team like that means they're missing the strategy, they're missing the governance, they're missing the structure, they're missing the co-location, and they're missing that culture of assessment. And so what we really want to do is think about how we create that. And that is the secret sauce for collaboration. It is providing clear strategy and governance and the right structure and co-locating folks in shared spaces so they can work better together wherever that's possible, and having that culture of assessment so that you are continuously adapting and improving. And this is a good idea. It's not just my idea. There's great evidence to support each of these things, because when you have clear strategy, it really works. We know that strategic planning and financial management account for 83% of institutional performance. We know that greater transparency correlates with better institutional financial metrics like primary reserve ratio. We know that when there is a reorganization to better align to needs and for the future, when it's tied to a strategic plan, you get better results. We know that when there is co-location for folks to work better together, there's not only process improvements and effectiveness for staff and faculty, but for students as well. It actually drives retention. And we know that if you have this culture of assessment and you're integrating change management as you make those processes and you're assessing and learning and communicating along the way, with good change management, you're 7 times more likely to achieve your results. And so this secret sauce, hopefully a not so secret sauce, I think can really help us collaborate better on behalf of students. But there are definitely barriers to that success. And we see these barriers in the evidence. We see structure is a barrier. 42% of staff and faculty at public higher ed institutions aren't satisfied with their structure. We know that part of the reason structure is getting more and more complicated is that things are growing. Over the last 40 years, faculty grew about on par with enrollment. Administration grew at about twice the pace of enrollment. Professional staff grew at about 6 times the pace of enrollment, much for good reason, but that creates a bigger, more complicated structure. And this is over the last 40 years. And we know that over the last 20 years, our campuses have also grown at twice the pace of enrollment. And so what that means is that you have more staff and faculty and they're more spread out. And so that can get in the way of collaboration, right? If it's more complicated and it's more diffused. And as a result of that diffusion and that increase, we know a lot of students are unaware of the services that are offered, right? 60% of students are unaware of the support services, especially health, mentoring, student success coaching. And so what do we do to increase awareness? We email them a lot. And so not uncommon for in the first year for students to receive more than 1,000 emails. And we know that only a quarter to a third of those are opened. And so as a result of that, there's a lot of communication, there's a lot of data, but the data governance and the access and the use of that data is not always optimal. In fact, an AIR survey or AIR survey found that 5% think it's optimized and 45% think it's reactive. If a great team that's collaborating well has trust and transparency and communication and clarity and all the things you mentioned, and it has the structure, the governance, the strategy, the shared spaces, the culture of assessment that we're talking about as our secret sauce for collaboration, there are some things that get in the way. And I would love to hear from you, what is the barriers for this successful collaboration? So it seems like structures and spaces along with strategy are the big barriers for folks. So let's talk a little bit about this secret sauce for collaboration so that folks can work better together. And it is really about having the strategy so you know how to win. It's about having the governance so you know the rules of the game. It's about having the structure so you know who's playing what position. It's about having the shared spaces so teams are co-located. And it's about having that culture of assessment so that you're learning and continuously improving and adapting. I'll spend a few minutes on each of these, offering a case study on these 5 different ingredients. And the first one is about strategy. And this was a project we did with University of Miami. And like a lot of folks, they had a very distributed, very diffused way of supporting students. Lots of great, well-intentioned folks working hard to help students, whether it's writing or tutoring or data or research or technology, but generally in different places. And so we looked at the data, we mapped out the relationships, who's referring to who, and if the part on the left looks like a mess, it's because it was, what a tangled web we weave with our referrals when we think about support services. So the idea is we don't have to reorganize teams, but we do want to co-locate teams and create a community of practice so that people are working better together across these functions. And in this case, it really started with strategy. And the way to get everybody unified was around learning outcomes. It was around defining the future student competencies and saying, we want students to be able to create, we want them to be able to collaborate, we want them to be able to work with data, we want them to be able to conduct research, we want them to be able to publish and present and promote that work. And working then backwards from those competencies, we said, okay, who all needs to be at the table? And how do they need to be at the table? Are they visiting? Are we co-locating when someone visits for offering a program, office hours, consultations? Or are they moving their whole shop in or somewhere in between where it's like a satellite presence? And by doing that, they're able to really create a whole that's greater than the sum of the parts. And really that strategy drove the structure, drove the service model. And as a result, from a transaction point of view, they're serving about twice as many students as they were because the services are co-located and more visible. Retention's gone up by about 4 points in the last 10 years, 90 to 94%. I think it's really been successful, and it really started with this strategy. I think once you have the strategy so that you know how to win, and I think I'll just say one more word about strategy. My favorite definition of strategy comes from Roger Martin from the Monitor Group and previously the dean at Rotman School of Business at University of Toronto. He talks about strategy as where to play and how to win. And hopefully you're not sports analogy averse, but I find that really successful as a way to understand how to get people focused. And so that strategy should tell people where to play and how to win. And once you have that, then you need the governance, right? You need the rules of the game. You need to think through who is at the table, for what decisions, how you're getting input, how you're reporting out, how you're getting feedback, how you're tracking your decisions. And this was the process we went through to create the IT governance structure for Colorado State, where they were really trying to go from informal and ad hoc to something more formal to better structure the process of getting input on technology investments. Was it time to change our LMS, or should we invest in this or should we invest in that? What's going to make the best use of time and money? And how should we manage this change, and who can lead this change? So it was really about identifying the thematic areas: instruction and student success, research, admin, infrastructure, and then forming the groups and thinking through when do they meet, how do they meet, what do they talk about, what's the standing agenda, what data do they review, how do they report out, and so forth. And that's really knowing the rules of the game so that everybody can succeed and collaborate much more successfully. Once you have the strategy and the governance, then your structure really needs to reflect that. And you all were talking about how sometimes siloed structures get in the way or they beget other problems. And we find that a great way to get the structure is to think about the functions and the services. And you'd be surprised how frequently these don't match up, where you have groupings of things that you do to support students or each other, and then groups of people, and they don't match up. And so on a project for a library service and staffing model for Columbia, it was very much about getting that kind of alignment. So first identifying the services and programs on the left, thinking through what are the different things. It's about finding and planning a project, gathering information, creating and analyzing, publishing and sharing, archiving and preserving, and then ongoing activities that aren't necessarily project specific, like consultations, events, operations, and driving that from looking at the trends, looking at strengths, doing an environmental scan. We also looked at other institutions and looked at what sorts of services they're offering and at what frequency, and then using that to, okay, if we understand the services, that can help us understand the staffing and thinking through FTE by role, by level to deliver the services. Once you have the strategy that helps you know where to play and how to win, and the governance that gives you the rules of the game, and the structure that puts that strategy into practice, shared spaces really help you do that practicing, right? Help you do that collaborating so that you're together. And we worked on a project for Normandale Community College that I bet the current state sounds really familiar, because when we started, you would go into their student services center and there was an advising space that had a reception desk, a waiting area, some study space, some consult space, some staff office space, only half full, let's say. Then you go next door to the tutoring center and it's the same thing. And then you go next door to the computing center and it's the same thing. And then you go next door to the writing center, it's the same thing. So lots of people behind closed doors working hard to help students, lots of empty spaces. Then students themselves, where they're sitting on the floor of the hallway with their laptop, huddled around outlets like it's some kind of campfire, and trying to get them power, not heat, and trying to do their work, or worse yet, they're in their cars because there's no place for them to be. So by combining all these functions, we actually freed up enough space to create a student commons where they had places to work together. And then we wrapped the services around the commons, which made them much more visible and accessible, and also normalizes getting help. So whenever you can blend study and support and meet students where they are, that really drives usage. And in fact, we did a study where we looked at 3 years of sensor data at 38 libraries, and libraries that had, I know this isn't a library example, but just as an aside, libraries that had student success functions in them, peak usage was actually 25% higher because services drive usage and that co-location enables collaboration. So you've got the strategy, you've got the governance, you've got the structure, you've got the shared spaces, but how well is it working? That's where you need that culture of assessment, and that creates an ability and a mindset of continuous improvement. And what I love about the continuous improvement process is that the needs assessment you do up front to figure out what to change and how to change it becomes a great baseline to measure those changes against, to measure your progress against. And we worked with New York University to better support students. And the idea was they had outdated spaces and they had an outdated service model. So they had student technology spaces that were rows and rows of desktop computers that students almost never used. In fact, if they were sitting down, it was mostly the keyboard was pushed back and their laptop was just plugged into the monitor. And all these computers were there basically for show, and then huge hulking printers. And students mainly came in when we looked at login data and usage data, they mainly came in to print something or to check email. And so the idea was, how can we transform our approach to embracing student collaboration and creativity. So these became hubs for students to work on creative projects. I want to build a game in VR. I want to create a podcast. And that requires not just new spaces, but a whole new service model to support them. Who's going to help you set up that space? Who's going to help you think through your audio settings for your podcast? Who's going to help you walk through your VR engine? And so we worked with them to really transform the spaces, the services, the tech stack to do it. And my favorite part was that the surveys, the reviewing transactional data, all that upfront work then became the baseline to measure our success. And there was a lot of success. So when we looked at the pre-needs assessment versus the post-assessment, once the things have been implemented, we saw a big increase in satisfaction with the space, a big increase with the satisfaction with technology, and a big increase with the satisfaction with spaces. So having talked through this secret sauce, or hopefully not so secret sauce for collaboration, I'd love to hear what you're most excited about implementing. Is it a strategic plan that provides focus? And that could be an institutional plan, that could be departmental, that could be a school. Is it about governance for more effective decision-making? Is it about breaking down siloed structures? Is it about co-locating distributed teams? Is it about creating that culture of continuous improvement? Is it something else? So we've got some folks saying co-location, some folks saying continuous improvement. So I want to leave you with some final thoughts on implementation from an unlikely source. About 80 years ago, the precursor to the CIA, the Office of Strategic Services, the OSS, created a now declassified simple sabotage field manual. And the idea is, how do you disrupt the progress of an organization? And of course, you can disrupt their infrastructure, right? You could cut the power or whatever spies might do. But you could also infiltrate that organization and behave in a way that's disruptive. And so this was like a field manual, tips and tricks for slowing down how to move fast. And some of these things sound really familiar. Not expediting decisions, talking as frequently as possible and as long as possible, with long anecdotes, refer everything to further study and consideration, make all committees as large as possible, never less than 5, bring up irrelevant issues, haggle over precise wordings, refer back to things that have been decided and try and reopen those matters, advocate for caution and reason to keep people from moving forward. And I think if we want to move forward, it's really about flipping the script on these kinds of things, right? It's about small, agile teams. It's about moving from a mindset of we have to have the perfect solution and we have to have complete consensus to we're going to decide by consent, right? People are going to feel heard, and then they're going to get behind the direction once they have. We're going to decide between and make decisions it doesn't have to be perfect. It has to be safe to try. And we're going to distinguish between reversible and irreversible decisions and scope our scrutiny accordingly. And I think if you flip the script on these things, that's how you create a more connected college or university where students succeed, where you can move beyond the conventional wisdom. And so it's not about staying in your lane and just defaulting to adding people in programs and being as broad as possible and doing more and more with less, but it's actually creating a connected college where you're busting silos, being agile, working with employers, differentiating your offering. So thank you very much. This is how you can get in touch with me. If you check out the book, I hope you enjoy it. I hope it helps you break down some of those silos and build effective teams like you talked about that have the trust, have the focus, have the transparency, have the clarity, and that you all are successful in your efforts. Thanks, everybody.